My high school sweetheart, Jennifer, once saved our home with a secret job. Turns out, the cost of that job was our entire marriage, and I wasn't ready for her final betrayal. My wife Jennifer, who I've been with for 9 years. We were the kind of couple that people imagine when they hear the words high school sweethearts. We met in high school and started dating after a cheesy school dance that everyone was pretty much forced to go to. Everyone thought we were the perfect match, but we had different plans for the future. I wanted to hit the books, study law, and become an attorney. She, on the other hand, dreamed of Hollywood and wanted to become an actress. Sure, I was supportive, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit nervous about how we'd make it work. See, I'd be knee-deep in law books while Jennifer would be auditioning all over the country. I graduated a year before her because, funny enough, even though she was 2 years older than me, she was a great blow. I never got to the bottom of that mystery. Every time I asked, she'd get defensive. Looking back, I reckon if I'd known the real reason, we might have called it quits right then and there. Trust me, you will understand later. After high school, I shipped off to law school out of state and we ventured into the land of long-distance relationships. Yeah, I can already hear you saying that idea, but I was determined to give it a shot. We chat every night and I visit for holidays and special occasions. Sure, sometimes she couldn't chat for one reason or another, but I didn't read much into it after she finished high school. She dropped a bomb. She wanted to study acting in Europe. Long distance in the same country was one thing, but an entire ocean between us. That had me worried, but she reassured me, promising endless phone calls and nightly chats. Time flew by with her in Europe, studying, acting, and me back here, nose buried in law textbooks. I met a lot of interesting people, some of whom happened to be women, but I kept things friendly. After all, I have law school exams to S and a bar exam to prepare for. Fast forward a few years. I graduated law school, passed the bar exam, and landed a job at a mid-sized law firm handling corporate contracts. Not exactly a thrill ride, but it paid the bills. Meanwhile, Jennifer was back in the States auditioning left and right, but mostly collecting a string of failures. Finally, we tied the knot officially. Although we'd been together for years by then, I slowly moved up the ranks of the law firm while she scored a few minor acting roles. We traded our tiny apartment for a house in Virginia. The price tag was hefty, but thanks to my stable job and good credit, we managed to get a mortgage. Then it happened. The CEO of my firm got caught up in an embezzling scandal. The firm went belly up and suddenly my job evaporated. We'd racked up some debt, and if we couldn't make the mortgage payments, we were on the fast track to getting kicked out of our new house. When I broke the news to my wife, we had a good cry together and started brainstorming ways to stay afloat. We thought about selling our stuff for her, working a part-time gig, flipping burgers. Unfortunately, these plans were like sticking a band-aid on a sinking ship. It wouldn't even be enough. With our mortgage deadline closing in, the pressure was on. Then, just a few days before we faced financial doom, my wife hit me with some exciting news. She had landed a big TV contract. She was all hush-hush about the details, saying it was top secret and wouldn't even be made public. It seemed a bit fishy to me, but desperate times, desperate measures. Right. So time goes on. My wife was an actress with more and more experience. And come on, we've all heard how TV shows will go to great lengths to avoid spoilers and such. So I didn't go into it. Besides, the paychecks she was raking in were enough to cover the mortgage. Because of this, life was back on track and I was on cloud 9. I almost wish I could have stayed blissfully unaware living that lie. But our marriage was already starting to smell like yesterday's fish. Half a year flew by. We were worry-free. No more nightmares about losing our home. I even found a new job at a smaller law firm just 3 months later. They were more about public advocacy than corporate jobs. And although the pay was less, it felt good to help regular folks. Meanwhile, my wife's acting career seemed to be on a rocket ride to the moon. The paycheck grew year on year, but she played her cards close to her chest, not revealing much about the gig. Over time, I started to smell a rat. It didn't seem too much to ask, to want to know a bit about what she was doing, especially when it was raking in the dough for our mortgage. But I brushed it off, convincing myself I was being paranoid and decided to let it slide again. After all, I had bigger fish to fry with my new job and some personal development stuff. Speaking of personal development, I took up a new diet and pledged to hit the gym thrice a week. My wife Jennifer, too, was putting in the effort. She dressed to the nines and put on makeup before heading out. Strangely, we hardly got intimate anymore, let alone go out on dates. So her looking like $1,000,000 was a bit baffling. I mean, TV does have high standards, but little did I know the real show she was putting on. Thinking back, you really can't make this up. The plot thickened when one day an anonymous angel decided to share her secret with me. I walked into work to find a plain white envelope in my desk drawer. On it was my name, with the words read right away. Inside were pictures of Jennifer, in a setting that looked suspiciously like a strip club engaged in activities that made my jaw drop. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Some nasty prank I could laugh about in the future. The photos weren't exactly crystal clear and could be mistaken for someone else. I clung to the hope that it was all just a misunderstanding or simply a joke. But nobody came to tell me it was, and my worries grew. I knew I had to dig deeper with some cash stashed away from pro bono work I'd done before landing my current job. I decided to hire a private investigator. I didn't exactly have the time or the stomach to sneak around strip clubs or worse. Besides, if my suspicions were unfounded, I'd be putting my wife through unnecessary distress. The private investigator wasn't cheap, but he was thorough. He traced the origin of the photos and got down in the mud on his knees to reveal what was going down. The report landed on my desk a day later, along with high-resolution pictures that drove the point home. There it was, in black and white. My wife Jennifer, my sweetheart of 9 years, was playing the lead role at a high-end swingers club. My heart sank and pressure built up in my throat. I could feel it pounding against my ribcage. The shock of what I had uncovered hit me like a bucket of ice-cold water. 9 years of marriage plans, of having kids once the mortgage was off our backs, all left hanging in the balance. I was blindsided, betrayed by Jennifer. After all we've been through and survived together, I needed answers. So that night I sat in the living room waiting for her return. It took a few hours into the dark of night for her to walk through the door. I noticed her being surprised at finding me awake. Usually I'd be sound asleep by the time she returned. Looking back, I should have seen it as a red flag. But hey, they don't call it hindsight for nothing. The nuclear evidence sat heavy in my pocket. But I wanted to hear her out first. I asked her point blank, "Why were you working for a swingers club?" She seemed to freeze. "Babe, you must be confused. I don't work at any such place." "What makes you say this? Where's this coming from? What makes you jump to such conclusions?" I felt a rush of anger but managed to keep my cool. I insisted she come clean. Jennifer kept denying and giving me the look as if I'm crazy. That's when I brought out the pictures, laying them out one by one. I watched her face closely. Each glance she took seemed to drain color from her face, the guilt radiating from her like heat from a furnace. The slight doubt I might have had about the photos being hers vanished. But instead of more lies or a defensive outburst, she broke down, sobbing. She claimed it was all for the mortgage to save our home. It was all for us. "You must understand that I'm ashamed. Look at what I'd become. I had to do this for us. But I couldn't tell you. I just had to keep it hidden." But my betrayal radar was beeping louder than ever. I pointed out to her that her fear of my disappointment didn't give her the right to stab me in the back. Her apology felt like a band-aid on a broken bone. She tried to reason that she never meant to hurt me and didn't even want me to find out. What the hell? Why? Is she serious? This excuse could never be enough for what she did. I then questioned her future plans. After all, I'd secured a new job a few months ago, and she could have quit then. We could have handled the mortgage without her nighttime escapades. She seemed at a loss for words, and frankly, I didn't need to hear any more. Suddenly, everything began to click into place. The designer labels hanging on the coat racks, the expensive decor around our home, her $1,000 clothes. How could I have been so blind? The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. Jennifer was no longer the humble actress. She had become a highly paid, sexy time symbol. One last question hung in the air. Did you enjoy it? The money? The fame? All of it? She remained silent, and the silence stretched miles for me. Finally, she asked, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to quit?" At this point, I was fighting back tears. How could I trust her? We stood there in silence, like two statues in a crumbling monument of marriage, hoping for a miracle. My life felt like a cheesy joke. Then she broke the silence, pleading for a second chance and vowing to quit the next day. I wish I could have just stayed cold and kicked her out. I'm sorry to say this, but it's the truth. I should have said no. That would have been the right thing to do. And God knows I came close, but I couldn't bring myself to utter the word divorce. The roots of who I am, who we are together and grew into, it felt like I couldn't. Instead, I found myself saying, "Okay." I gave her a second chance. And the next day, against her wishes, I accompanied her to the club to confirm she was really quitting in front of me. My wife squared things off with her boss. My fist clenched at the sight of his self-satisfied smirk. After this emotional ordeal we left together, I decided to take a week off from work and reconnect with my wife. We tried revisiting our days as love-struck teenagers, the sweet nothings, the silly pranks, the laughter. It felt nostalgic. And for a moment, I truly believed we could salvage our relationship. As bizarre as it sounded, my wife's previous job at the swingers club had saved our house, a hard pill to swallow for me, the so-called breadwinner of the family. But she quit right before my eyes. And we now had more time for each other. Another week rolled by, and she began applying for new jobs. Around the same time, my law firm assigned me to handle a $1 million lawsuit requiring me to travel to Indiana. The thought of going long distance again made me apprehensive. However, my wife's assurances gave me the courage to accept the job. We met each other a passionate farewell at the airport, filled with promises, hugs, and kisses. As I left, I felt a mix of excitement for my new role and anxiety over trusting Jennifer again. So here I was, trying to trust my wife to remain faithful while I was away or in the marriage. I chose trust. You might judge me for it either way. Just when things were looking up, Murphy's Law struck again. The universe decided to test me further. I had been weak. I showed I wasn't ready to be strong. So my cheesy life had to shift in gear for me to learn. The first few weeks of the new job were promising. I was defending young teens on the brink of juvenile detention, rewarding work that I had been seeking despite the work. I made sure to ring up my wife every evening. However, after a few weeks, I noticed a shift. Sometimes she wouldn't be available or wouldn't answer at all. She had her reasons, of course. The job hunt. Errands to run. Which I swallowed hook, line, and sinker. Then came a cryptic text message at work one day. It was from the anonymous angel who had first alerted me to my Jennifer's secret life. The message brought back a wave of unease and my heart began pounding again. I quickly shot off a reply and set up a meeting at a local restaurant the following Tuesday. The week couldn't have gone slower, but Tuesday finally rolled around. I wrapped up work by 5 p.m. and drove to the restaurant. I got there a bit early, ordered the first thing I saw on the menu, and settled into my seat. Not that I was interested in the food. My attention was entirely on the mystery guest who was about to turn my life upside down again. Just after 6 p.m. an elegant woman walked through the restaurant doors. Instinctively, I knew she was the one I was expecting. As she approached my table, she introduced herself. "My name is Nancy, and you're Jessica's husband, right?" "Yes," I responded. My curiosity piqued. "How did you get those pictures?" She let out a heavy sigh before answering. "We worked at the same club. I quit last week." She paused, looking at me carefully before elaborating. "I should have come forward sooner, but I feared losing my job. Now that I've left that dreadful place, I think it's time you heard the full story." A whirlwind of emotions gripped me. Nervousness. Excitement. Uncertainty. What was I about to uncover? About my wife? "Go on," I said, leaning forward in anticipation. Nancy exhaled, then began. "Jessica and I were co-workers. We shared the same shift and often spent our breaks together. I had been there for 3 years before she showed up. I helped her settle in, unaware that she was hiding her marital status. Every time I asked her if this was the job she really wanted, she confidently replied, yes, and I believed her at first. She would clock out promptly after her shift, heading straight home. But over time, I noticed changes. She began spending more time with the patrons and staff. Our club attracted many actors, and Jessica seemed to bond especially well with them. She also started showing up at work in increasing daily lavish outfits. This wasn't unusual for the job, but Jessica was going all out. Nancy then shared how one night Jessica invited her to a nightclub after work. They both ended up pretty drunk, though Nancy drank less as she had to work the next morning. Nancy, taking responsibility for Jessica, stayed booked an Uber and decided to see her home on our ride back. Jessica asked me why I worked at the club. I told her the truth, the need for money, and my failed attempt at landing a job elsewhere. When I asked her the same, she initially said it was to pay her mortgage, but then she admitted that she now worked there because she liked the luxury the job afforded her. Nancy then dropped a nuclear bombshell on me. Yes, even bigger than all mentioned before, Jessica in her drunken state blurted out that I sounded like her husband. I was horrified. "I knew you must have been in the dark, so I took those secret photos to alert you. Using social media, I found your workplace, left the envelope in your cubicle, and hoped for the best." I was stunned, my mind replaying the night I had confronted my wife. "You started for us. But you kept going. For you." I had told her my gut instinct was right, and I regretted not trusting it. I regret acting like a weak simp during this. Nancy, noticing my silence, waited for me to respond. I thanked her for her honesty and revealed my decision to file for divorce. With that, Nancy left the restaurant, but something still felt off as I was preparing to file for divorce. I received a shocking letter. The hits keep on coming. Jessica had beaten me to it, accusing me of abuse, mistreatment, and even infidelity. The absurd accusations were backed by a photo of Nancy and me at the restaurant. Suddenly, it dawned on me Jessica had been spying on me. Overwhelmed by rage and anxiety, I realized I had to stay composed. Despite the damning evidence and my wife's public slander on social media, I knew the accusations were baseless. My first step was to rehire the same private investigator. Armed with a trove of evidence against my deceitful wife, I was ready to fight back. Jessica may have made the first move against me, but I was determined to make her regret it. I compiled all the information from the private investigator and stored backups on my phone and computer. Next, I messaged Nancy, asking if she'd testify for me at the divorce hearing, as my wife had snapped a picture of our conversation and was accusing me of infidelity and worse. Nancy's reply came after a full day. "Yes, just let me know," when I texted back, informing her that the hearing was set for next month. I spent the night organizing everything and preparing myself for the final end to my wife's deceitful games. Fast forward a month. The day of the divorce hearing finally arrived. I picked up Nancy and we drove to the courthouse in Virginia. I had her take a seat early in the courtroom. I wanted my wife to remain unaware of Nancy's presence until it was her turn to testify. After all, if my wife could blindside me with more lies, I was justified in surprising her with the truth. I met with my attorney too, who arrived 15 minutes after Nancy and I. My wife made her entrance 45 minutes later, accompanied by her extended family, a well-dressed man who I assumed was her attorney, and a young girl who bore a resemblance to my wife. A few minutes later, the judge entered and the hearing began. The opening statement by my wife's attorney was shocking. He accused me of the very infidelity that I had accused my wife of. He claimed I forced her to quit her job.